For those of you who don't know, this is the Future Proof Masterclass. I'd like to say we do this monthly. I've been falling behind a little bit, if I'm honest. So now we have not just one expert, but four to make up for lost time. And the idea behind it is Future Proof is all about creating inspiring futures that matter. And this started a couple of years ago during COVID for us to have a personal learning network to start thinking about interesting ways to really, learn what we needed to make the most impact and create work that matters for us. So we've had things from AI to more tactical, how to get a TED Talk, et cetera. And this particular month, we're going to focus in on, I would say, maybe not the future of work, maybe the now of work, and green transitions. And this is because a lot of people I know are really smart in this, and a lot of them are on this call, both the folks on the panel and otherwise. And then I've also moderated panels where I have all these global HR people going, there's just not enough people with green skills. And so there seems to be this funny mismatch. And I thought, wow, well, maybe we could just hear from people who had made this massively successful transition from, gee, I feel like this is important to me, to I've actually figured out a way to make it my job or to incorporate it in a way that allows me to give impact. So we have assembled the best of the best, including Meredith Odgers, who is a Future Proof alum from the Future Proof course and community, who has done a tremendous amount of work in fintech and marketing and established her own consultancy, Bamboo Works, and then was lured away by Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership to do what she does best, which is A, ideate, and B, really create a community going into digital marketing, et cetera. So she is going to spearhead this wonderful panel. And we've picked people that have very different backgrounds from finance and healthcare and marketing. So everybody on this call can kind of go, oh, yeah, I relate to that. And we will go for, half hour, 40 minutes, save some time for questions. But please don't be polite and either raise your hand or put your questions in the chat, and we'll have a fabulous conversation. And I hope we all learn something, and panelists included. So over to you, Meredith.
Thank you, Diana. I'm not sure if I'm the biggest expert here because I feel like I'm surrounded in them, but we're all part of the story.
We'll learn together.
We're all part of the story. We're all learning all the time. So thanks for having me, and also welcome to our panelists, but also everyone else on the call. So we're set for a really diverse, I guess, backgrounds and stories for the next little while. I will introduce the other panelists and ask them at the same time just to tell us in a nutshell their personal journey towards a more green or sort of sustainable career transition, or where they're focusing. So I'll just give the names first and then go to each one. So I'll start going around the sun. So David, you're over in Asia. David Mundy, welcome. Very much financial services based, and I believe a fellow Aussie. We got connected through Diana, so thank you. Paul Randall, who is a fellow marketer, and hopefully one day we'll never have to put the sustainable marketer in the front of our titles somewhere, but marketer who I met actually doing some studies on sustainability in business, and also Nazneen, and Nazneen was also doing those same studies, but is from the pharma, but also medical science world. So in that order, I'll come back to you, David, to do a little highlight of your personal journey to where you are now and where you're leading to.
Sure, thanks, Meredith. Hi, everyone. So I've been in asset and wealth management industry for about 25 years now, and that's taken me from a long time ago now, Melbourne, Australia, and then in London for 10 years and the past 11 years based in Hong Kong. And, throughout that career, mainly focused on sort of transformation, technology, operations COO roles. And although all along the way, I've always been very passionate about CSR, and over the past sort of 5 or 6 years as well, DE&I, which was a great sort of foundation as I sort of came more lately to sustainability. So I joined Fidelity International 5 years ago after spending around 14 years at JP Morgan, and 5 years ago joined Fidelity. 4.5 years ago, the then head of sustainable investing and other sort of business stakeholders presented a challenge, which was that this sort of sustainability ESG thing was gathering momentum, and there wasn't many resources around to help drive and support that momentum. So I kicked off a global program to support the activities around sustainable investing, and that very rapidly grew. The team, both on the investing side and also in the dedicated function that I created, grew as well, from myself to sort of more than 25 odd people globally, and again in parallel with the sustainable investing team. Along the way, we collected corporate sustainability as well, because we worked out that if you're talking the talk, you need to walk the walk as well as a firm. And then also along the way, I would describe myself as drinking the Kool-Aid in terms of really getting passionate about sustainability, and that led to also looking at professional qualifications, so the ESG certificate from CFA, CISL, business sustainability certificate, and then, as I now am in my second year of the Sustainability Masters at CISL as well. And from my perspective, very much, molded my role into a full-time role around sustainability. And again, I see that sort of continuing, whether that's sort of more into dedicated sustainability roles, but, and I'm sure we'll talk about this later, is over time, coming from a COO role, all roles and all C-suite roles and board level roles will need to integrate ESG. So I see myself setting myself up for future leadership roles by getting these skills and obviously getting this passion and purpose at the same time. So yeah, that's a brief overview.
Thanks, Dave. And I think that last point, we were just having a pre-chat before we all came on, just not about everything and anything, but I think that was that last piece about the forward projection of what is required in the leadership toolkit, that is pretty key here, and certainly a common thread. I'll come to you, Paul. Over to you.
Thank you, Meredith, and hello, everybody. I think everybody's journey is going to be quite personal, quite different here. I'm a career marketeer for my sins. So straight out of university, straight into marketing roles, and been there pretty much ever since. I was really lucky in my first role in that I was heading up marketing communications at the British Standards Institution, and was luckily involved in the launch of ISO 14001. Which gave me a great experience, introduction to some great people like, Jonathan Porritt, who set up Friends of the Earth and things like that, way back in 1996 or something horrific. But then kind of got sidetracked. Sustainability became part of my personal life, so I was always cycling to work rather than going in the car and things like that. But got excited by tech and ended up going into tech for a long time. Launched Europe's first search engine, launched Europe's first cloud computing service as a startup when we were trying to get Windows XP down a dial-up connection, and that was never going to work. So those startups came and went pretty quickly, but I got a relationship with Microsoft and ended up there for a decade running Windows, and for my sins, launching Windows Vista on you all, for which I am very, very sorry. After that, I fled Microsoft, and I was based down in Australia at the time, Did a lot of traveling, started bringing sustainability back into my head by volunteering on lots of conservation projects and things, and got back to the UK when headhunters were saying, well, you've done tech and you've done marketing, you understand this digital thing, don't you? To which we all nodded, and then spent the next 15 years trying to figure out what that meant. And that involved walking around big corporates like Philips and Visa and places like that, trying to transform them. And it's interesting the way that David was talking about kind of sustainability becoming everything. You know, I think there's a great parallel in the digital transformation journeys we've been on, where in the early days, you had digital specialists. I was the first chief digital officer at Axon Bell. And now digital is the water we all swim in. And I think sustainability has got to go on that journey. You know, you don't really have chief digital officers anymore. But I was in the middle of all that consulting, got to do lots of data work with some very big payment companies and very big social media platforms that I won't name. But when I say Cambridge Analytica, you know who I'm talking about, and actually was using very much the same tech, very much the same kits and processes that Cambridge Analytica were using, but for commercial, consumer-orientated goals, and feeling really nervous about it. And then one day my daughter just walked up to me and says, "Daddy, is your job good for the environment?" And that was in this room, actually. That was the nail in the coffin. I had to do something about it. So when we trained, met Meredith in the process of doing that, and that was really enlightening for a couple of ways. One, the course we did gave me the toolkit with which to look back at my career and, to be perfectly honest, go, oh shit, I've been causing a lot of the problems that I'm seeing around me by driving over consumption and things of that sort of nature. It also gave me a real big insight into marketeers, of meeting lots of sustainable enthusiasts on this course. And I'd walk up to my colleagues and go, "Hey, hi, I'm Paul, I'm a marketeer," and get that, "Ooh, aren't you the problem?" And we started using the phrase growing our devil horns, because myself and my co-author were literally kind of feeling like we were counting the corner, growing our horns as we were introducing ourselves to our students. So it gave me that inflection point. Do I leave marketing, or do I try and do something about it? And it was one of our professors on the course who says, look, marketing's got a role to play. It's just pointed in the wrong direction. And that was when I said, okay, so let's figure that out and see what we can do about it. So a couple of years of research into the impacts of marketing. Out of that, myself and colleague Alexis launched the Sustainable Marketing Compass, which is the first framework for embedding sustainability into the heart of marketing. We launched that as an open source framework. We launched it nervously on LinkedIn, pressed the go button, expecting, my grandparents and next door's dog to look at it. And we had 750,000 people view it in the first 24 hours. Since then, it's been a bit of a roller coaster. We've consulted with big national companies, from energy companies through to pet food companies. We've consulted through the big agency networks. We've transformed agencies themselves. We even went back to Cambridge, took the compass with us and said, what do you think of this? And they said, oh, we like that. Will you help us write our sustainable marketing course? So I'm now, I sit on the advisory panel for that course. I'm a tutor on that course. And we eventually went to Kogan Page and we wrote a book about all this, which was launched last December. People seem to like it. It's got lots of lovely reviews, and we're currently finalists in the 2024 Business Book of the Year awards. So, but we're up against Solitaire Townsend, so we know we're not going to win that. So yeah, that's the journey, going from kind of like a gamekeeper poacher, or poacher gamekeeper. I'm not sure which way around it is, but that's my journey.
We'll just come off mute. Thanks, Paul. That's fantastic. There's a lot to unpack in there about challenging the status quo, and a term that a lot of sustainability people like to use a lot, which is business as usual. So business as usual meaning not thinking in a more long-term, truly sort of sustainable way for not just business and economies, but people and planet as well. So with that, I'll segue over to Nazneen, who has a different kind of backstory. But once she's taken us through some of that and her insights, you'll start to hear that whilst very different backstories, there are common threads here. And that's what we'll tuck into for the rest of the call today. Thanks, Nazneen.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation today. It's great to be here. So I do have a rather different background. So I'm a doctor and a scientist by background. I've always been very interested in being able to use science to help as many people as possible, and increasingly go beyond people, and thinking about how we can be better citizens. And I actually started my sort of focus of both my clinical and scientific career was in genomics for a long time. I was at the beginning when I was having to explain what DNA was before DNA became the sort of generic word for blueprint that everybody uses. So that just gives you an indication alongside Paul of how long I've been around. And actually, it was a pretty uphill battle, actually. People didn't necessarily, it was newfangled. People didn't really see the value. There was plenty to be done. It cost a lot of money. But actually, genomics now has become really fundamental to many aspects of healthcare. And the things that we had to do there, which was a lot about handling big data in various ways, absolutely became foundational, not just to healthcare, but to many other areas. So it was sort of really at that pioneering edge. And I liked it. And I liked the opportunities that it gave to dream about what was possible. I liked the way you could bring new technology and potentially have impact. I quite liked, more than I thought, having to sort of persuade people about things that they didn't even know they wanted yet, things that they thought, well, I don't need that now, but you're like, but you will, and helping people go onto that journey of thinking about the possible. The things I didn't like so much was actually there were just all these impediments all the time. So we never sort of were able to quite realize, and still are not quite realizing those, the full potential. And the other area that genomics people often don't understand about, it's really, really, really useful for prevention, but we've never really been able to deliver on that yet, mainly because certainly in the UK, and I think most places don't have national health services, they have national sickness services. We wait for people to come ill and then we look after them rather than having that prevention. So there was a little bit of me about that, around that was feeling a little bit that I couldn't quite deliver on that. But the main thing I learned during all of that is that in order to deliver change, and sometimes I describe myself as a change maker, yet you have to be able to ride the zeitgeist. Timing is kind of everything. You can drive it to a certain extent, but there has to be at least some momentum going in that direction. And certainly in the last decades, genomics the world over was sort of at the zeitgeist. But coming into 2020, a couple of things happened. One, I think as we're sort of experiencing a little bit now in sustainability, perhaps you have to keep reinventing yourself to be new, and to sort of people to say, all right, has it delivered, or is it? And I felt that genomics might go into a little bit of a lull there. And I thought that sustainability, one, this had to be a decade for us to have change, but I thought it really might be. So that was one thing. The other thing that back in 2019, it became aware to me for the first time, really, and that's on me, really. I was unnecessarily ignorant, just the large contribution that healthcare is making to climate change and greenhouse gases. Around about 5%, healthcare globally would be the equivalent of the 5th largest emitting country. Now, of course, we're a huge industry, but nevertheless, it's our job, our responsibility to deal with the many negative impacts of climate change on healthcare, and yet we were a major contributor. So, and we really weren't doing that much about it. So it felt like a sort of new area where perhaps I could bring some of my skills, but it really felt like a responsibility. And so for me, it was really an extension of that. Sustainability and many of the principles are at the heart of healthcare, but it was about being good for people, good for planet, and good for the business of healthcare. And of course, healthcare is a business. And I thought there was potentially a real opportunity to bring those things together, so that at least for healthcare, sustainable healthcare would be the best way to do healthcare. And that's why one would do it. So business as usual kind of is sustainable. And I'm very much in favour of making the path you want people to travel just the easiest path. So I did a couple of things. I'm on the board of AstraZeneca, a very large pharmaceutical company. Actually, I don't need to explain that since COVID, everyone's heard of AstraZeneca now. And I've been delighted there. I set up and I chair the board committee for sustainability there. It's had incredible support from the CEO and the chair. We will be a net zero across scopes 1 and 2 by the end of 2026. We have scope 3 approved by SBTi. We're a global manufacturing R&D organization, that the commitment of everyone really to deliver on that. I'm sure most people here will be aware of what that's taken. But the positives of that, the cultural change has been really wonderful to see, and how people have resonated with it. So that was one thing. And the other thing I did was set up a company called You Maker, which stands for You Make the Difference in some way, but I've never really elaborated on that homonym. And what we're doing there is really about making science-based solutions to make healthcare more sustainable, and really that's thought leadership to drive policy, that's partnerships to drive culture, and that's products to drive action, and really very much focused on action. And we do two things. I set up the Sustainable Medicines Partnership, which now has 48 organizations across the world, and we have this 4-year program to reduce the waste of medicines and from medicines. Billions of medicines that could be used get thrown away for all sorts of reasons that apply to all supply chains, and we need them. And then the other thing we do is has made a footprinting technology really about scope 3 for medicine. So instead of having to get all the supply chain, we do it from source in silico and from the molecular structure of the medicine, so that we can do product level carbon footprints now for many thousands of medicines. So that's me.
Thank you. I feel like I just also had a masterclass in the genome and genomics. So thank you very much. Okay, so I think that we've got a few stories there. I'm just going to give mine super quick, because I think I know some of you on the call, but also new to many of you as well. Well, I also am a career marketer and studied and then spent my whole career in marketing, mostly in finance and financial technology, or sort of some startup work as well. And I spent my whole career launching new products, establishing new regions, establishing new categories, which in the tech world is quite interesting. And there are those fail stories and fail fast, like Paul mentioned. But it was a lot of greenfields type work, even if it was in established industries. And I really loved that, because it's the challenge of growing something from the beginning and sort of seeing it through to most of the time success. But we all have failures as well. But through doing that, my moral compass was checked a little bit along the way, and I didn't really tap into that and understand it. But one of my roles, for example, was with Citibank in the credit card portfolio of Singapore and Hong Kong. And whilst I was in the marketing team, it was a pretty geeky side of marketing, like looking at sort of pricing strategies and risk strategies, and basically how we could get customers to build up balance on their credit cards and never get off that revolving credit line, in which case the fees and all the sorts of things came along with it. And it just rubbed. I just couldn't do that anymore. So then I went to the institutional investment side of financial services, which was more working with like big pension funds and asset managers and banks. So kind of doing the same thing, but at the other end of the spectrum. And it was there that I was introduced to Will Alton, who headed responsible investment for FTSE. And it started to open my eyes that there's a better way to allocate investments for our planet, which also is matching with more of my personal beliefs and values. And after living in Asia for a really long time, saw a lot of things that just really challenged my view of the world. And so really, in the end, my personal and professional lives were just really polar opposites in terms of beliefs and values. And I decided that I needed to change that. And so I was made redundant just before COVID. So I did set the scene just before COVID had been made redundant. I said I was a bit early on that for everyone else. But while I had a little bit of time up my sleeve, I joined Future Proof and did, Diana and the team there, and really enjoyed that sort of group and sort of coaching side of things to work out, I'm halfway through my career. What the hell am I going to do for the second half of my career to try to bring some of these values and beliefs together and be more of a whole self, whether it's at work or life? I mean, definitely separating those two things to make sure there's space, but just really leading more of a purposeful path in my career, after sort of then realizing that when I did the CISL Business Sustainable Management course, I too had that light bulb moment like Paul, which is I'm in marketing, I'm in finance. Like I'm like double whammy part of the problem that's probably got ourselves to, the world that we're in today. So all of this all coincided in this moment. And then there was COVID all in, on the background of COVID, which I know has probably challenged many of us and sort of views and worldviews in many ways. So off I went into consulting to try and then forge that path myself, because I couldn't find a path for me that fitted into a normal corporate world. And then after doing that for a few years, a job came up at CISL and I thought, education, scaling sustainability, business leadership, which I had been doing. I was a practitioner, and so here I am doing that now, which was it comes with a lot of changes in work practices and all sorts of things that I'd never really thought to navigate before. So it is a journey, and that's sort of my personal journey that has melded into the professional journey. I love what I'm doing, and that sort of sustainability education at scale for business leaders, because I really feel strongly about, like, we all have agency. We need to use that, whether we're in a role that is focused on sustainability, or if we believe in a more, sort of a better world ahead, to find ways within our own paths, within our business as usual work environments, to start being some of the leader of the change that's needed. So that really resonated with me, and that's how I got to here. What comes next in the next, I don't know, what did I say, about halfway through my career? I think I've tipped over that point now, but I don't know exactly. But I know for the time being, supporting people to be those agents of change is something that I feel really, really fantastic about. But then there is this collective journey bit, and I'm going to delve into some of these things. I think that when I did Future Proof, for example, I was feeling quite alone, and I just didn't know where to go. And I saw Diana's Future Proof course pop up, and I thought, oh, maybe that's what I need. And I knew Diana because we both were in the Financial Times offices in Hong Kong, although on very separate businesses. And I thought, okay, let's join this thing and see what happens. And it has been the gift that has kept on giving, in terms of, that collective journey, going along with other future proofers through what's almost like a self-realization, self-education experience, but professionally as well, to sort of deliberately design almost the next steps. And the path was really unclear, and I think it was for everyone else as well. And we're also in the backdrop of COVID, which just, is just so much uncertainty. And I think that it was through that collective journey that it started to make me not feel quite so alone. It was testing, ideas to bounce. And we all do that in our daily work and lives. And so sometimes it's good to do that on ourselves, is one sort of thing I would say. Alongside that, doing some studies in sustainability leadership, I found another group, another tribe, and those two things, effectively have merged together. So I think, if we stay on this collective journey bit, I'd like to hear from, we'll come back to you, sort of, Paul, first, the collective journey, because I know that you've done a lot of collaboration, and it's not a solo exercise that you've been on, even though some of it feels very alone. So over to you, and to hear about your views on collective journey for a more sustainable future.
Yeah, it's a really valid point. You can feel quite alone and isolated when you make some of these pivot decisions, because you're going against a lot of established business as usual grain. But as I said in the intro, the kind of almost accidental, really smart move that we made was to open source our framework, the Sustainable Marketing Compass. And we've been really lucky that that was really well loved, really well adopted, and has really built a sense of partnership and community around that. And it's really fascinating because a lot of it means going against the way you've been trained to operate if you've been in a commercial sort of role, which is like competition's healthy and you keep things away from your competitors and you don't share and those sorts of things. But actually, personally, I find it far more rewarding, far more empowering, and far quicker to collaborate and to move forward with those collaborations and to reach out openly to develop those communities and those networks around you.
I'm going to come to you, Nazneen, because there was a few things that you mentioned in your journey, personally and professionally, where you were doing one thing which led to another, and almost with the AstraZeneca side of things, this concept of entrepreneur really felt like it stood out for me, that it started bringing attention to usual practices and doing them in a better way for all sorts of good reasons, not just for the health and positive approach to that, but obviously the balance with business. So that sounded really interesting. I'd like to dig into that entrepreneur sort of side of things, which sound like it almost then helps you become an entrepreneur with UMaker and some of the work that you're doing there. So tell us a bit about that and how you pull all of those threads together.
Yes, I mean, I think I'm very much focused on where I want to get to. What does one want to achieve? And I would say that I've become more and more purposeful about how people are going to have to operate in those things in a really sort of structured way. I think it's pretty mixed. Sometimes I think having a lot of people involved is great and really helps. Sometimes I think that isn't the right way. I think having a very small group of people, or even on one's own, really honing something and doing that through that, I think that can be the way forward. It depends a little bit how radical it is. I think the cultural piece, people getting behind, and as I say, in AstraZeneca, there was already really strong commitment from the CEO, from the chair. So there was a sort of, and you could see there was a desire from the workforce. So it was really a way of being able to have a sort of fostering where that it was clear you sort of had the top down support and the bottom up excitement, but then there was how are you logistically going to make those work and deliver. Now, in a big company, you can put resources on it, you can put the money or whatever. In many other situations that one doesn't necessarily, particularly in recent times, people have had their backs against the wall. But I think what one finds there, and I really like, is to champion, as I say, we talked about the passionate people, and I think that they're everywhere, people who for one reason or another, just how we've been doing things, particularly around waste. So I like having areas that sort of everyone can get behind that, and everybody hates waste. So if you can sort of lean onto something where the system is the problem and people can say, do you want that to exist? No, we want it to change. So you can sort of drive that. So I think those have been the sort of driving forces, and it's really been about what is it that I'm really wanting to see happen at the end, and then what are the best ways to do that. And usually it will be a combination. I have traditionally, if people are all going in one direction, I'm usually walking in the opposite direction. So I'm often trying to get myself to go. So I haven't had the same kind of issue that often people have saying against the crowd. I'm like, no, come on, I'm going to stay here because I'm sort of naturally a little bit anarchic. So, but I think when you can do that, and there've been all sorts of knock-on effects. I think that Paul was saying unexpected things. There are all sorts of people that through the Sustainable Medicine Partnership in particular, people have been in these different parts of healthcare and have really wanted to talk about sustainability, but often it feels like a trade-off, some kind of competing. You want me to prioritize the planet compared to this person who's ill, and you're like, that's not the trade-off, so, but you're sort of often on the back foot there, but giving them an opportunity. And now all sorts of people who started off with us and were sort of hiding a little bit have gone on to be running sustainability variety of different organizations, and sort of, they say, it sort of seeds the belief and the momentum, I think. So, but I think it always comes down to people in the end.
Yeah, agree. There's some interesting things here, because I think depending on where one is at in terms of their career journey, so it's probably fair to say that we're all not in our early to mid 20s, finishing university or whatever studies we're doing. We're partway through life. And so green careers, green sustainability, like in business, it just wasn't a thing. I think it was more, if you're going to be a scientist or an environmental scientist, or go down the path of healthcare, for example, or a marine biologist, or what have you. It felt like it was more associated with like conservation type orientation than it was in business. I mean, if I had my time again, I look at all the subjects that my son in doing his A levels could have studied. I was like, I would do it also differently. But I don't. We are where we are. I think though there is the choice, therefore, to start off in a career, whether it's in business or some of those other areas where it's at the there is that orientation already, and sort of a real belief that want to live more with purpose, align our lives work-wise with some sort of purpose or a thing bigger than us. And I see that in a lot of hiring I do over the years, and there's a sort of a generational culture towards that. But then there's a very large group, majority of the workforce, that is partway through their career, and so that transition piece sometimes feels quite daunting. You mentioned backs up against a wall or going against the crowd. I'm going to come back to that after we hear from David, because I think that picks up on a great bit of conversation we're having just before this call, while we're in the waiting room. So hold that thought. But I'll come over to you, David, and I'll stay on this sort of collective journey, entrepreneur sort of piece, because it sounds like your work started off quite sort of entrepreneurial in a way, but it's allowed for sort of internal entrepreneurship to look at sustainability much more holistically, not just in the investment funds or choices and things that Fidelity are doing. So tell us a bit about that and how you've either led or been part of that collective journey for your work.
Yeah, I mean, I think the entrepreneur piece is, from my perspective, I've sort of always had a touch of that, and I think, again, CSR has always been a passion of mine, and you've always got to try and influence and push people to sort of go beyond their day job to try and get out there and help support the community and be active, etc. So, but when we kicked off this journey to try and, again, transform Fidelity, which was a laggard at the time when it came to ESG, and has come a long way, I think, since we kicked off the program. Part of the challenge was that culture piece. How were we going to transform the culture and the mindset? Because it was easy to go off, right, we need to go and build our sustainable investing team and go and hire more experts. But that wasn't going to transform the organization. We needed to have a wholesale shift in the way people thought about sustainability. It wasn't someone else's problem. It wasn't, if you get a query from a client around that, send it to the team of experts and leave it at their door, and that's it. So what I conceived was a ambassador program. So we created the Sustainability Ambassador Program, which, again, to start with, the first cohort was about 80 people. It's now about 350 strong globally across Fidelity. But at the time I handpicked those sort of 80, you're going to be our first ambassadors, very deliberately trying to pick someone from audit, pick someone from marketing, pick someone from the finance team. And as part of that program, it was introduction to ESG and what is sustainability, but also we're going to send you on the CFA ESG course if you're more on the investing side. We're going to send you on the CISL business sustainability course if you're more connected to the corporate sustainability side. So start building up that knowledge and awareness and understanding of sustainability at the grassroots level, because you need that awareness if you're going to, over time, integrate it across the organization. So it was trying to get those levels right. We had to build up the expert teams. We built up my team around data and technology and transformation, etc. But then we needed everyone to come on that journey. So, and that I think has been very successful. I'm very proud of that initiative. If you look at the Fidelity TCFD report from last year, you will see the 300 ambassadors pictures on the front page of the TCFD report. Again, obviously, it's not over; it's a continuing journey. We sort of, there's more to do, but I think it's, again, just thinking about that cultural aspect, which is really critical to being a change agent effectively in an organisation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really good example of, if something's not there, then we can create it. It might be feeling like an uphill battle, but if it's something that feel strongly enough about, taking a little bit of time and working that through an organization, I think there's the waiting for, it's not in our strategy, it's not being talked out at the right levels, and we're just waiting for the strategy to come and tell us that we need to do something about this. But actually there is this sort of top down and bottom up thing, I think, that you also mentioned, Nazneen, and actually that's quite an interesting lead into a question that we've got from Michelle. Thanks Michelle, which is really about, in business there are really huge organizations and then mid-market and smaller organizations, and I think the question is around that it's often been, or feels like it's been, smaller businesses challenging the status quo to do things better and more purposefully, but it's actually the big organizations that may have resources or sort of the attention as well, to make change and activate that. So when they do that, everyone takes notice and sort of the market follows, and there is that leadership, piece at an organizational level. So I think, Michelle, jump in here, but you're sort of talking about mobilizing sustainability and where it sits in that sort of big, medium, small part of the market. Would you like to elaborate from there, and then we'll take some ideas from the panel?
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you all. This is really just such an interesting and stimulating discussion. I guess my background, I come from, investment banking, and I also happen to sit on the board of the development board of the Soil Association, which is really, trying to change things. And, that organization's been around for 75 years, saying a little bit like, a few of you are saying there's been this voice out there saying you need to do something about this for such a long time, and they were sort of in the dark for such a long time. And there's this, we couldn't have Shell as a sponsor or BP as a sponsor or McDonald's as a sponsor because they're the baddies. Yet the largest buyer of organic milk in the UK is McDonald's. For sure, the biggest, driver of the shift in energy will be those big firms, because they must and they have to eventually when they get there. And so I'm just sort of interested in your experiences, because you all have both startup role and also, roles within larger businesses who can really lead. If we're sitting here looking at our careers and saying, how do we transition? Where those roles are, how important it is to have done something grassroots to change, to have authenticity in, driving change within those large organizations. Let's maybe leave it at that as a simple question.
Yeah, I can have a little first stab at this. It's I think we're always, like, the royal we, everyone's always looking to the big organization. They get the most airtime out there. They're also under the most scrutiny as well. And, I think that's that factoid that you just mentioned about McDonald's and organic milk is, I find those stories really fascinating. And what's been really challenging, I think, is actually large organizations, there is a lot that's being done. They are challenging largely their own status quo in many ways, because customers are demanding it. investors, shareholders are demanding it to, you know, guarantee stability, resilience, you know, long-term sort of return in a sense, which will be jeopardized if you don't sort of take notice of not just, you know, your economic impact, which is usually internal, but the impact on things around, which create a lot of new risks, or, you know, evolving risks in areas that we haven't traditionally risk managed. And then I think the third is, you know, there is always the people aspect, but they don't tell those stories because there's all the other stories of maybe less good examples of things that they may be doing either inadvertently or sometimes quite unintentionally or with naivety, because if you think about supply chains, you know, it goes a long way, like right back to source. And so those are the stories that we all see in headlines, and then we end up with this sort of green hushing effect. So we've all heard of greenwashing, which is, you know, when organizations put, you know, a nice glossy sort of sustainability story, you know, over something, but haven't really thought through like the sustainability story end to end, and, you know, therefore get, you know, scrutinize it. They're not actually really being sustainable, or other parts of the business are, you know, like oil and gas are, you know, it's all bad. But I think there's a green hushing issue that then happens. We're not telling those corporate big stories enough to then mobilize, you know, the more positive solutions and thinking that, you know, these things can be done, but it's a journey. I mean, we talked about journey a lot today. So I think there's that part. And I think there is the pressure from disruptors and smaller businesses coming through and saying, there is a better way. We're going to build that from scratch. We have a blank sheet of paper. And so I think there is, again, this sort of concept of top-down big corporates trying to do what they can, and, you know, it's changing over time, but it is a journey, but maybe not telling that story either well or with confidence because of the fear of being, you know, the recourse that can come from that. So we need to encourage that, I think, in our roles. If we're, you know, have these good stories, you know, as business leaders, we should be able to have the confidence to say so, but then tell that in a way that it's part of a journey, it's one step. We've got many more to make, and actually just be realistic about that. And I think that narrative and the toolkit that a senior leader has, that's a big part of it that is still being really challenging at the moment, and will be for quite some time. But
have
equally,
some of the other folks, like, you know, been in positions where they can bridge that gap? I mean, you're all, in a way, you know, have dealt with big companies, but also, you know, smaller initiatives, either a project or a company or a movement. How do you manage that?
Yeah, I can talk. Oh, go on, Nazanin. It's fine.
Yeah, I sort of embody this. I think I'm a natural creative, and I like innovation. So I've always been my sort of natural home as a small innovator, disruptor. But most people want the things that they make to be used, and particularly if you're in healthcare, you want them to be available to as many people as possible. And so that involves an engagement. And then if you want other people to change, that involves another level of engagement. So I think I have, and it's not always been easy, but I still have some tensions around it, I have to say. But I've very purposefully decided I'll be right at the beginning of the innovative, the disruptive edge, and do whatever I can there. It's my natural home, and I can support and do all sorts of things. But then I'm going to go as high up as I can, whether it's the board of a multinational or it's policy change, to bring an informed sort of edge to that. Because I think often we want policy to change, but the people who are changing policy aren't informed. So you have to engage. And I think the one thing I would really like people to think, and we have to do partnership, but there's not enough it's really hard to do partnerships. It's just hard working with other people generally, isn't it? And so we think, we're just going to have really complex partnerships with these people who are competitors in other areas. So I think we have to be purposeful about that and recognize and be open that it's hard. I think we have to recognize that what we're doing here is exploring. And as a scientist, it's fine. We don't mind making mistakes. You can only make progress if you're just progressively less wrong. That's what we're doing as scientists. So we're fine with that. And we need people to be able to explore, to be able to say, oh, that didn't work. we didn't know the unintended consequences. Oh my God, there are just so many of them. But if we're not allowing people to have a go, and then the thing I really want is we've spent so long thinking about conflicts of interest that we make it almost impossible for convergence of interest. And so every time one's thinking about that, I really think we need to focus on the convergence of interest. And if, we have to cope with some of these conflicts of interest, well, we know we either all win or all lose. And so we have to get into that side of mindset. And I think in many ways, we all have our own identities, and sometimes we have to sort of change them a little bit. And we're doing things that we didn't used to do in our radical youths or whatever, but we don't have the luxury. We just have to do whatever it takes to be the the better humans that we need for our descendants and our planet. So I think we just have to get with the program, really.
Well, I think one of the things that I use here is kind of getting very quite specific about my own moral compass and my own sense of impact. Because you can be in a big organization and be a tiny cog and not drive change. Equally, you could actually do a huge amount with a small startup, and actually because they're a small startup, they're not having that much scale of impact. And it's finding where you're comfortable. It's finding where you feel comfortable in those kind of almost ethics and that sense of your own personal ambition and ability and capability to drive change. To bring that alive in a couple of examples, I just completed a whole audit of the automotive industry from what they're doing from a sustainability point of view. And I stumbled across this amazing little reference point in Skoda's kind of automotive report. And the report was saying that they'd missed their Scope 3 targets for the year with a little asterisk. And the little asterisk said, we missed Scope 3 because marketing launched a coupe. And you could almost feel the pain of the poor sustainability lead in the whole of Skoda going, I'm trying really hard, but there's other things happening around me. So that sense of, am I able to move the big ship? So allow yourself to kind of explore where you're feeling morally and ethically correct and where you're actually having an impact. Personally, I've just moved to a kind of an in-house role in a big global medtech company with Boston Scientific, where I genuinely feel there's a huge amount of ability for me to have scale. At the same time, I've been advising a tiny little 2-person chocolate startup called Kindred Forest, who are actually so passionate about the rainforest. Half the time I don't know where they are because they're lost in the rainforest. And it's like, how do I help them come to market? And it's almost like I'm balancing myself out. I'm prepared to accept that working with the big corporate, I'm going to get a bit dirty. I'm not going to get dirty enough to go and work for Shell. I will never be able to go that far. But I'm happy enough to go into a big medtech company that's obviously got its challenges, but the sense of progress feels real, and I can check that sense of progress and it's genuine. If at some point I start feeling that, well, equally, if I start feeling that kind of Kindred Forest aren't being genuine or Boston Scientific aren't being genuine and the progress of change and traction isn't there, then I'll go and I'll focus my efforts and move my efforts appropriately.
Thanks, Paul. David, any thoughts or comments to add on to that?
I would just add a couple of big things. Just, I think you sort of mentioned, Mara, I think, when it comes to the leadership messages around this, I think part of it is you need to explain that it's very complex, right? And when I started my sustainability journey in the investments space, where you come into it and say, right, we need to sell all of our big tobacco stocks. Why the hell are we investing in big tobacco, right? And of course, and I'm not sure I've completely changed my mind on that, but it isn't that simple, right? It is nuanced, it is complex, and having met the Chief Sustainability Officer, Philip Morris, and you learn about the farmers. What are the farmers going to do? What are their families going to do? What are the communities going to do if they stop growing the tobacco? And again, it's just understanding the nuance and the trade-offs. But I think, Paul, to your point, it's understanding where your moral compass, where your comfort zone is in that aspect. And then I think from that point on, from my perspective, it's what allows me to sleep at night is keep being a disruptor and keep asking the tough questions and keep saying, hey, great, so we're going to engage with the tobacco companies instead of exclude them. What timeline are we going to put on that engagement? How long are we going to give them to transition? Right. So I think that's how I've got myself comfortable. And I think the key is innovation is obviously, as you say, Nazim, key. But I think the component that I like around that is the disruption piece. And I try to that's for me one of the core tenets of being an entrepreneur is I try to keep the sort of questions coming and be an internal disruptor for the good for the good of the company community, and allow me to keep sleeping at night.
As somebody who's basically spent their entire lives being a corporate disruptor, it's just so interesting because there's a lot of parallels between emerging technology and sustainability. And Paul, I think you said that, that sort of the chief digital officer was what we needed 20 years ago or 10 years ago. Now we need the chief sustainability officer. What are you guys all going to do in 15 years when we don't need a chief sustainability officer? Like, what is the dream? What do you want to be working on?
Well, for me, I think it's always been the same thing. I just like to be useful. If I can leave the world a little bit better than I found it and feel and I feel like there'll be opportunities for the rest of my career to do that. And it may change. I think sustainability, for most of us, probably it's a kind of way of life, and that we've already, if we were here at this stage, it kind of resonated. So I think that I expect we still have to, in the way that we all have to continue to work to be tidier or better communicators or whatever. I don't think the work will ever be done, but I certainly would love it to be core part of just how we operate at work and at home. So, but yes, I'm not anticipating needing to find something new to do in the rest of my career, I have to say.
I mean, I think for me, I'm really interested in the economic transition. I'm really passionate about. I mean, it's such a difficult journey we have ahead of us, but it has to happen, right? So I think I'm really interested in helping that journey. I'm really fascinated in things like donut economics and new models and ways of thinking about the economy, and trying to drive that again from inside financial services companies. And I think that's a long road. So hopefully I can help on that in Fidelity and other organizations. The other piece for me, more personally, is I'm very passionate about gardening and growing my own food and being more sustainable, from a family and home perspective. And yeah, one of my goals is to get to the point where we are more self-sufficient. Difficult in small apartments in Hong Kong, but maybe not impossible. We'll see.
I'm impressed.
Similar. I mean, different topics, but a similar vibe there, I think, to David, although I'll never be a decent gardener, no matter how hard I try. There's topics in my particular sphere in marketing that are, there's business as usual in marketing that's 70 years old, and we're not going to change that culture. We're not going to pivot that overnight, and if I can focus my career on some core shifts in that industry, then that's where I think I'm best kind of spending my time. With the move into Boston, I can actually put in practice a lot of the innovation and thought leadership ideas I've been working on for the last 4 years. But there's still a huge way to go. The marketing industry is a $740 billion industry in its own right. Only 1% of what it does is effective. If you get a 1% response on an ad, that's a good thing. And actually, a marketeer will celebrate going from 1% good to 1.2% good. We're the only industry on the planet that can celebrate being 99% shit and get away with it. So it's like, imagine if you were in automotive and you rocked up to the monthly meeting and said, yeah, we made 100 cars this week and one of them worked. Marketing's got a long way to go. It creates a brain print that establishes these lifestyles that we all aspire to that are inherently unsustainable. You know, marketing created the two-car family. Marketing created this idea that if I want to express love, I have to buy a rock and put it on somebody's finger. You know, which drove the whole mining extraction industry for diamonds and things. You know, marketing has been massively complicit in these challenges, and my mission is to change that. And, you know, how effective I'm going to be remains to be seen. But I think there's more than 15 years worth of work involved in that.
There are times when making the decision to go, oh, you know, I'm going to move forward with this purpose-led career and not even knowing where to start. And I think I addressed some of that earlier. So, you know, if there were some areas where I'd say, you know, educate yourself is one. So know what you don't know. There's lots of options out there, from, you know, really full-on postgraduate type things, but through to very technical, you know, climate job, green job type you know, technician oriented things. So wherever you are and what industry you're in, your role you're in, there's a lot of good quality options out there to educate yourself, and that's a good place to start. And you'll also meet some of your tribe. I think the other part is meet your tribe. You know, join, whether it's your own industry organizations or associations in the business as usual world. You know, ask people questions about what they think, where they think the industry's at. Just start immersing yourself, I suppose, in what you do today, and asking the questions, and you'll be surprised what answers you might come across. But yes, it's taken me 4.5 years of really dedicated focus to now have a place where I still feel a bit like an intruder sometimes, and surrounded by incredibly smart, PhD oriented people. But actually, the common thread is, by being drawn together by that common purpose, we all have a role to play. And I come from a very marketing commercial world, but feel like I'm living in a sustainability world a bit at work, but not a true, you know, sustainability expert when I look at some of the people around me. But every role is a sustainability role in some way, just as the same way every role has become, you know, a digital role, you know, compared to, you know, when, you know, how we actually work and things like that. Every role is a data role. Every role is a governance and compliance role. You know, to me, it feels like there's always a part of our role that it doesn't mean that your business as usual and sustainability type professional worlds need to be a separate thing, and they start to merge together over time. So just be brave, and yes, keep focused. And when you're having a bad day, like I would read so much sustainability or climate change stuff that I would have days of, like, quite honestly, deep, dark depression, thinking, I think I want to give up. But then you have a conversation, or you see a great good news story where something's and, you know, you get revived and refreshed all the time. But yeah, just look after yourself and talk to people around you, and you'll find that it's less lonely.
I think resilience is a really important skill just in general, I think, and being able to be resilient. I think part of that resilience is not taking things personally. So I think one of the good things about, if there's some kind of purpose, whether it's healthcare or planets or things, it really helps you, because you understand why you're doing it, to be able to take those knocks and process them in a non-personal way, because I think often one feels bad, one's, you know, said a stupid thing, or and it makes you. But I've always found it good to be able to think, oh, you know, what am I aiming to do? I've got this big thing on my study wall. It just says hope. It just says hope in something. It just makes me feel a bit better. So, but I think resilience is really important. I think if you're itching to do something, I would say, and I do say to anyone, just do something, anything. It doesn't matter whether it's small, whether it's at home, just do something so you feel like you're making some headway. It's surprising how whatever you've ended up doing for whatever reason, how that leads to something, the next step. I mean, Paul's story is the sort of sublime example of that, or something, and then sort of where he's there. But certainly, because in some ways you're drawn to something that for whatever reason is attracting you, and it might be the aim, it might be it's leading into things that are your own skill sets. And often I think with sustainability, they're not the direct skill sets. They're not the direct things that you learned at uni. There's something else that you're able to make happen in some way. And we all have them. So, and then you can also just get back to that, this one thing. And then I think the difference now, I think from even 5 years ago, is there are many, many different ways in which one can make an impact. I think 5 years, 10, 15 years ago, you had to be an activist because no one was listening. There was still, climate change deniers. Now, you don't have to be an activist. I'm not an activist. I'm an actionist. So I had to wait till I could do actions. But you still had to be pretty disruptive. You had to sort of be prepared to be smashed around a bit because it wasn't. But now I think whatever you want to do, you'd be able to find a tribe where you can do your part. So if you know how that is, if you want to be part of something that you really believe in, or if you want to create something new. But I don't think it's true that everyone has to be really radical and be right at the forefront. I think there's a way now for anybody who feels that's an important part of them to be able to participate in the way in which they feel they're bringing value and they feel valued. So I think that's a bit of a change. And so I'd like to think that we're all disruptors by here because we're here. But I think perhaps I don't want to give the impression that's the only way you can make a major contribution. I suspect actually I hope we're becoming a little bit sort of, stop with that. We get the message. We're now doing stuff, So, but I think that resilience and having remaining hopeful, it's really important to remain hopeful, I think, because as Meredith was saying, you might have to insulate yourself from that. So those would be my pointers.
Thanks.
Wonderful. Well, I think this is a good place to end for us. We'll let everybody go off to their next meetings and their bedtimes if they're in Asia. Thank you all for joining us. It was really interesting, and I hope that this has a ripple effect as you think about other conversations you can have with people. And feel free to stay in touch, and I will send out a recap of all of this with the recording because I think that there's a lot that I feel like I want to watch it again. I feel like we need to have part 2 or something. So thanks so much for all of you guys. Great. Thank you especially to our panelists for the prep calls and making time now and for sharing your expertise. It was really, really interesting. And I'm fired up to figure out how I can make a difference as well. So thank you.
Thanks, Diana, for pulling it all together, and a challenge for everyone. Tomorrow, go and make one small action that brings together your personal beliefs and values in your career. Just one little thing, and maybe share it amongst the group if we can do that on Future Proof, Diana.
Sounds great. Yep. Sounds good. Yeah. Share it on LinkedIn and tag us.
Yes.
Take care.
Indeed. Have a good week, everybody. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye. Thank you.